Welcome back to Wellness in Minutes, where we give you bite-sized health information that's easy to digest.
And what happens in that acute inflammation stage, that initial stage, which is good, right? It's our body doing what it's supposed to. It's trying to protect us because, you can be stressed out about the fact that you just got fired, but your body's responding to it like there's a tiger chasing you currently. Your body goes into a state where your tissues become more porous, and that way your immune cells can travel through them to do their job. But that means that you essentially have leakiness throughout the majority of your tissues. This includes your gut. So if you are now in a immune state because your brain is stressed and your brain is telling your immune system to be on the defense, your immune system goes into a defensive state. This is called a cell danger response. Your cells also change, like the membranes actually kind of stiffen up in like a protective response because the chemistry is shifting. So then your cells don't operate the same, and you're not going to be in a state to absorb nutrients. And now you also have particles kind of leaking through the gut. And this is supposed to be like, a very short sprint where you're like running from the tiger up a tree. But now it's like weeks and months and years for people in this state. And then you start to get these things leaking through your gut, whether that's food particles or debris from bacteria. Gram-negative bacteria have something called LPS, lipopolysaccharides, which is like a little signal molecule on their surface. And if that leaks through, our immune response to that is pretty intense, and you can have some brain inflammation from that. And, these things don't always show up as gut issues. Like people think that it shows up as, bloating and diarrhea and constipation. Not always. It can totally show up as a brain issue. Things that I will say that can often indicate something's going on with your gut and inflammation is like just an overall feeling of feeling dense and heavy and feeling puffy and thick. Or if you are having an autoimmune disorder or really weird weight gain or weight that you can't get rid of, and then the digestive symptoms, constipation, diarrhea, reflux, feeling like you have that, that frog in your throat, or like feeling like you have an itchy tongue or an itchy throat. That can be part of the histamine response. And then in the brain, it can show up as like irritability and depression and anxiety and brain fog and blurry vision and headaches and migraines, and can show up as fatigue and flushing of the skin or acne or getting a rash, itchiness on the palms or the bottoms of the feet, or swelling, like even just subtle swelling around your eyelids. Like when you wake up and you have those puffy eyes and they're kind of all droopy, that means that you might want to like check in with what you did over the last day or two. And, what did you eat? Did you have a immune response? If you're like, I ate perfectly, I don't understand. Look at your stress response. You're like, oh, I did have that really stressful meeting at work. Okay, like that might be it. And then, it can go into joint pain and arthritis or just like allergies. And there's a whole bunch of peer-reviewed research tying asthma and gut health together because it's essentially your immune system responding incorrectly because your gut biome is not training it correctly. There's even like a really good little cartoon from NPR, just like National Public Radio. And it's like a 5-minute cartoon you can use to explain to kids of like how your immune system and your gut are related. And so if we start to get this leaky gut and we have food particles leaking through, and now we have bacteria particles leaking through, and then our immune system is on high alert and it's distracted by all this stuff. And then all of a sudden it can't take care of like, the cut that we get. And then we get a little bit more bacteria from like a paper cut. And then our system just starts getting overwhelmed with like all of these pieces it's trying to control simply because we're dealing with gut permeability and stuff that's supposed to stay contained isn't contained anymore. It's leaking into our bloodstream. And then that creates what's called a subclinical level of endotoxemia, meaning inwardly produced toxins. So you're accidentally poisoning your own blood. And I think this is where we start to get fatigue and brain fog and memory issues and just not feeling like yourself or feeling grumpy or just not having emotional resiliency can be another really big piece of it. Or if you're like really not getting good sleep all the time, sleep is how we repair. So if you're blending all of these together and then you're also pounding the coffee and you're really stressed out, that's like a recipe for you might have some health issues in 5 to 10 years. And so I think teaching people this now is why it's so important, is because if you can understand like, oh, I had pizza and beer last night and I'm really puffy today, I should probably focus on some protein and veggies for like the next 4 days until I'm not puffy anymore. And then I can consider having another beer. And that's how you live your life and enjoy yourself and enjoy your holidays and stuff with your family, but you do it in a sustainable way where you're not tanking your health by doing too much back to back all the time. Like, you just have to give your body some breaks to catch up and clean up all the debris so that your immune system and your cellular functions can operate correctly.
Beautifully said. Beautiful. And so for patients that are coming into your office, and especially with gut issues, with leaky gut and gut dysbiosis, any type of dysfunction in the gut, what would be your first method of healing, besides what you've just mentioned and all the beautiful explanations that you've given on the reasons why this is happening? But what would be the first thing that you would address with these patients?
Yeah, it would depend on the client, which is always my answer, right? My answer is always, it depends, because everybody's different. If I get someone who has a ton of food sensitivities and is really sensitive to a whole bunch of things, and they sit there and they tell me their entire medical history with a pretty straight face, where they're not that emotional and they're very businesslike about it, I know that person is pretty disconnected from their body and their nervous system. So we'll actually start with body work, because if I just throw a bunch of supplements at them, their body's going to reject it anyway. And, I'll usually have them stick to whatever foods they're able to do. But then I really like to run a food sensitivity test with that person, because to me, there's a lot of tests that you can run that are, expensive, where you can figure out, exactly what inflammation marker there is, or, what autoimmune marker there is. My question is always the same. What are you going to do about it? It's like, you can know what autoimmune markers are high, but I want the actionable thing. And the actionable thing is how to remove the inflammation and then how to heal the tissues. So the first thing you can do on how to heal the inflammation is a food sensitivity test. And it's a pretty simple thing to run. They tend to be decently inexpensive. They're not totally accurate and they change over time, but it'll give you an inkling of like what things are, really not great for someone. Most common things I see are gluten, dairy, corn, eggs, soy, genetically modified stuff. I've even seen more sensitivities to salmon coming up, because there's so much genetically modified and farmed salmon, and farmed fish that's fed really terrible stuff is actually like a carcinogen now. So you have to be really careful with your meat selection. But I'll start there. If someone's really sensitive, it's like, okay, well, like, what can we take out that is going to just stop lighting fires in the first place? And I think stopping lighting fires is step number one. That can look different for different people. I have another guy who has ulcerative colitis, and he can't do veggies. Like, it just pisses his system off, even though we are taught that, vegetables are good. They feed our microbiome. His system cannot handle the roughage. So for him, he's doing the carnivore diet, and that works for him right now. And it's nutritionally dense. He gets what he needs. We're working into being able to do other things, but he came to me really, really inflamed. So that's where we're starting with him. In general, if someone's, not so intense and not so sensitive, and they're just kind of dealing with, like, let's say bloating, right? That's a really common one. My first question would be, like, where's your bloating? Is it up high or is it down low? It tells me if it's in the small intestine or the large intestine, and that changes how we approach things. But, most common is in the small intestine, because that's usually SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I'll ask them, and this is where the history stuff comes in, right? Like, I ask, my intake form is very detailed. Ask them, like, I don't want to go over what they're eating for breakfast. I want them to write that down. And then I can ask questions of, like, when you eat this, does this happen? And that's like, those are the history questions. And so, if someone's getting bloated within like half hour after eating, it lets me know that they have SIBO that's, fairly high in the small intestine. And with that, then we look at like a FODMAP diet, which is, again, stuff you'd normally consider healthy: garlic, onions, all that kind of stuff that would normally feed your microbiome. For them, because they have an overgrowth, we don't want to feed the microbiome. So for them, something like carnivore or keto can actually be better, because it starts to not to overfeed the microbiome while we maybe work with some antimicrobials, depending on their status. And then we can also work with, fiber and binders to kind of pull out some of the excess that's there. And I think using binders is something practitioners miss a lot whenever they're doing detox stuff. And I think it's pretty important, because you can, use like a antifungal or antimicrobial, and then their system and their liver can get totally overwhelmed trying to handle the debris. And so I think using binders during that time is important. And then at the same time, I still like to work on food sensitivities for those people. And I think it's really important to work on the gut lining, because you can remove all the food sensitivities, but if you don't heal the gut lining, they're just going to develop new ones of whatever food they shift to. And ironically, it's usually the food that the person is eating the most. They're like, I eat that all the time, I have a sensitivity to it. That's why they've just had more opportunities to be exposed to it while they have this leakiness in their gut. So, a really simple thing people can do at home is just bone broth. It has glutamine, it has B vitamins, it's nutritionally dense, it has minerals. You can put veggies in there to get the secretions of the veggies. So it's a really nutrient dense thing that has collagen and all the other things that your gut needs to heal. And, you can just drink it straight. You can cook rice in it. You can use it to simmer veggies. I use it all the time in my cooking. I usually have bone broth around, and it's like you throw it in a crock pot and you ignore it for 10 to 20 hours. It's super easy. And so it's a very easy thing to make at home. And that's just like a classic food thing that you can do. But aloe is another one that's really healing for the gut and actually can recycle your glutathione as well. And then depending on what's going on with the person, like if they're dealing with gut issues and they've had a toxin exposure, that person I'm definitely going to use binders with, because the toxin exposure is part of the inflammation that's making them leaky too. It's not always just the food. So that's where the complexity of cases changes the approach. Like it can't really be the same for everybody, but conceptually, the way that I, really like to think about it is we kind of have to start with your mind and what signals are you sending to your body? Like we have to fix your brain first and what you want your body to do. So it's more like the subconscious thing of working from a state of like, body, I am so grateful that you're healing so rapidly. And I love that I can sit here and watch in my mind's eye you healing the membranes and the cellular lining of my gut. And you sit there and you imagine your body healing it, and you just watch it get stitched up. And those are meditations that you can play with, where you are visually and intentionally and energetically sending instructions to your body of what you want it to do. Your body's pretty incredible if you send it instructions. It's just people forget to do that. They forget to intentionally put in an instruction with their body. And this is the idea of self-care. Self-care can come in a lot of different forms, but it's the idea of intentionally taking a break from your life and going inward and having a good relationship with your body in a state where you feel safe and grateful and positive. And it's like those emotions chemically change your system. And then it's getting your lifestyle in line. Like if you're not sleeping and you're not eating, you're not drinking water, you're really not going to be able to heal from conditions. So we just got to get the fundamentals down.
So yes, thank you everyone for listening. I really enjoyed that talk. I hope you did too. And there will be more of these on the Food Matters podcast. So head to foodmatters.com and see you again.